Cybersecurity is in the news a lot these days, and what I wanted to talk about here is how one particular aspect of that, cyber attack, plays into cybersecurity, not just as a threat against us, but also as a possible tool we can use to protect ourselves against attack. There have always been good guys and bad guys have always engaged in conflict. Over the years, their basic motivations haven't changed, but as you can see from this view graph, technologies have been changing a lot. So we go from spears to bows and arrows to guns. And now, when we add computers and information technology to the mix, there are a whole bunch of interesting issues that come up that I want to explore today. To start, I wanted to explore something that we all have some sense of. Here's the situation, and this is a bad situation. That is, the bad guy has a gun, and the good guy, us, are completely unprotected. So here in this picture, we put ourselves into bulletproof vests, so the bad guy doesn't have a free shot at us. So what do we have to think about in giving bulletproof vests to the cops? Now, in this picture, of course, the star represents the cops whom we authorize to act on our behalf. There are a lot of questions that come up when we start thinking about how to give bulletproof vests to the cops. For example, how effective are the vests? How can we make them stronger and lighter? How can we make sure that every cop who needs a vest gets one? How can we make sure that every cop gets a vest that has been made without any defects? But the vests are only half the story. At least in the United States, we give the cops guns too, since they need to be able to fight back. Bad guys have guns, and the good guys ought to have guns. So when you give guns to the cops, there are all kinds of other policy issues that arise. For example, we might ask, what kinds of guns do cops get to use? When are cops allowed to use their guns? This is something that's sometimes called rules of engagement. What does a cop actually need to do in the field to identify a real threat? How does a cop know who's an innocent bystander? All of these questions have direct analogies in the world of cybersecurity. But notice that the two lists are very different in character. The first list about playing defense, the quality and the use in the bulletproof vest and so on, is very narrow questions. The second involves policy issues, and the bad guys never have to think about these kinds of issues. The second set of issues is what the offensive side of the cybersecurity debate is all about, and it's what the nation needs to be talking about much more than it has been, and it hasn't been doing so very much. It's not about just handing someone a bulletproof vest and then walking away. The story is about how to give the good guys every tool they need to protect themselves and us against the bad guys who are well armed in cyberspace. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about both sides of it, the defense a little bit, and then more about the offense, since that's what's not being talked about. So let's talk a little bit about the defense. We hear about the defensive aspects of cybersecurity all the time, but if we only talk about the defensive aspects of cybersecurity, we get a very limited picture of what's going on. Here, the bad guy shoots at us and misses. That's good. Here, the bad guy shoots at us and the bullet hits us in the vest and the bullet bounces off. That's good. On the other hand, this time, the bad guy shoots us in the head and we fall over. That's not good. So if we only think about ourselves as the targets, eventually something is going to hit us in the head. So we can't think of ourselves just like that. It's important to take a closer look at the defense. The defensive side of cybersecurity basically has two aspects. The first part of it is preventive technologies. That is things like antivirus programs that you install on your computer and programs, software that isn't vulnerable to attack. These are sort of like making the bulletproof vests stronger and more reliable. Preventive technologies do reduce the risk. Okay? There's no question about that. And sometimes the bad guy shoots and the bulletproof vest protects us, sure. On the other hand, the bad guys know how to escalate too. And eventually, there's going to be a very big gun pointed at us that our bulletproof vest, that is, our antivirus programs and so on, will not be able to handle. The second defensive aspect of cybersecurity is law enforcement. And law enforcement, the cops, are a very important part of cybersecurity. We rely on cops to protect us, to go after the bad guys and to shut them down and so on. On the other hand, the cops, when dealing with cybersecurity, often take months rather than minutes to solve a cybersecurity problem. That is, to go after the bad guy and shut them down. A long, long time. So an interesting question that we might ask is, why does it take so long? Why is it that a cybersecurity cop has to take a long time? Well, sometimes he doesn't have to take a long time, but when the bad guy has been clever, it does take a long time. Why? One reason is that tracing the source of an attack and finding the bad guy is like trying to find a needle in a haystack. Here in this slide, we see an attack, and it's clear who's responsible. But the reality is really more like this, or like this, or, in fact, it's more like this, when there are no arrows letting us know where the attack is coming from. Another issue for the defense is the current legal environment. Laws are often inadequate or absent when cybersecurity risks are involved. So if you take a look at this slide, you see that there are some missing words on this page. There are spaces there. That's because the laws haven't yet been written. And the words are blurry. You can't quite understand what they mean. That's because, in some cases, nobody understands how the current laws on the books apply to cybersecurity. So in the United States, a private company that's under cyber attack has only two legal options. It can raise its shields, right? It can protect itself by putting up antivirus programs and firewalls and stuff like that. And that's a good thing, and it can do that. Or it can call the cops and wait, and wait, and wait. But if they shoot back, or if they even hack back in order to find the attacker, they may well violate the law. So returning fire is not necessarily an option for a company that comes under cyber attack. So here's the situation today. The cops try their best, but there are lots of bad guys, and we're surrounded, and they stay busy. That is, both the cops protecting us and the bad guys trying to attack us. And so I hope I've persuaded you that the cyber defense has many interesting problems to deal with. On the other hand, when we start giving guns to the good guys to shoot back in cyberspace, the problems become much tougher, and they become policy problems rather than just tactical problems. As a matter of national policy, the United States has expressed an interest in having offensive cyber capabilities, as General Keith Alexander testified in his confirmation to become head of Cyber Command. But it hasn't publicly discussed the nature, scope, and extent of those capabilities, not even in general terms. Nor has it discussed in any particular detail its policy governing the use of those capabilities, or in fact anything that it's ever done offensively in the past at all. So it's our view that more public discussion about these matters is appropriate. What kinds of questions should such a discussion address? Well, the questions that were raised earlier regarding arming the good guys are all relevant, and some new questions arise as well. What kinds of weapons do the cops get to use? In regular space, in real life, cops get to choose a variety of weapons, and the same is true in cyberspace. That is, there are many different kinds of weapons that can be used in cyberspace. For example, one of the kinds of weapons is weapons that can be used at a distance, sort of the things that can go over the internet. That's called a remote attack. But there are also close access attacks. That means, for example, I can attack a computer by going to the loading dock where it's being shipped. So before it gets to you, it has to sit on a loading dock before it gets put onto a truck. So I can break into the loading dock, open up the box, swap out a chip in it, or add some software to the computer, and then reseal the box. And so it gets sent to you, and you never know that somebody's tampered with it on the way to you. That's one kind of attack that people often don't talk about. Also, some weapons can be aimed at a very specific computer, like yours or mine, or since I'm a nobody, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, for example. That can be a very specific target. Some guns in cyberspace can be set so that they can attack multiple targets at the same time. This would be a non-specific attack that would attack hundreds of computers, or thousands of computers, or millions of computers at once. When are cops allowed to use their guns? The analogous issue in cyberspace is framed by the UN Charter. That is, under international law, a nation that is the subject of an armed attack is entitled to exercise its right of self-defense. And the Charter also says that all nations shall refrain from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. But what counts as an armed attack or a use of force in cyberspace? The UN Charter was written in 1945, and I guarantee you no one was thinking about cyber attacks in those days. What happens if a cyber attack causes $1 trillion worth of loss to an economy or to a national treasury, and the amount of money goes down and down and down until there's nothing left? Does that count as an armed attack or a use of force? Or what if a cyber attack causes a shutdown of electric power in a city on a very hot day? Is that an armed attack or a use of force? Or what if a cyber attack is used to hack the electronic voting machines of another nation and swings the election in a way opposite to what it would have come out in a fair election? Is that an armed attack or a use of force? Or what if a cyber attack destroys data or alters it clandestinely? What if the data is part of a military database that affects the mission readiness of the nation's armed forces? Is that an armed attack or a use of force? Take a look at these two screens. They're a little bit different. Here we see what's different. I've changed VVXYZ to WXYZ. And if I hadn't highlighted it, you might have taken a long time to figure out what was different. Or what if a cyber attack disrupts the computer networks of an unfriendly nation scientist who are working on developing a nuclear weapon? Is that an armed attack or a use of force? Or what if a nation implants software inside another nation's computer systems for spying? As it turns out, that's legal under international law. But what if it can be upgraded remotely to turn it into an agent of attack, like we see here? Is that an armed attack or a use of force? So there's also the question of how to behave in the field. Once we know the rules under which we're supposed to operate, how do we actually do that in the field? So in practice, even if you know all the rules of engagement, there's uncertainty. The rule might be, for example, you can fire back at the bad guy that has a gun pointed at you. But there you are wondering if the guy standing over there is a bad guy, if he has a gun, and if it's really pointing to you. And you have to decide in half a second. Well, as you can see in this picture, it's not clear that the thing that the guy on the right is holding is really a gun, but if you had just a split second to look at it, well, maybe it might not be so clear. The same issues play out in cyberspace. If we're attacked in cyberspace, we may have a chance to reduce the impact of the attack if we strike back quickly at the perpetrator. Indeed, we may need automated strike back capabilities to do this. But if we act without being sure who the perpetrator is, we may strike back at an innocent party. How should we resolve this tension? That's another interesting question that comes up. And how do you know who's an innocent bystander in cyberspace? For example, what counts as a neutral nation in the context of international law? What responsibilities does a nation have, if any, to allow or not allow its internet facilities to be used to transmit an attack to somebody else? In this picture, we're in the center and we're being attacked. We're being attacked by the guy at the bottom. But is the guy at the bottom responsible, or has somebody else compromised that guy's computer? And how does the bad guy give up? In the world of cops and criminals, the bad guy stops shooting, puts his hands on his head and comes out with a white flag and walks out of the building, and the cops can see all of this happening. But in cyberspace, this isn't as neat. The fact that we're in a shooting war in cyberspace with another nation doesn't mean that other parties aren't still shooting at us. We're subject to cyber attack from lots of other parties all the time, every day. And just because we get into a cyber war with Zendia doesn't mean that there's other nations are going to stop attacking us, or those other parties are going to stop attacking us then. So if we negotiate a truce in cyberspace with Zendia, how will we know that Zendia is observing a truce? And how will they know that we've stopped firing at them? We might also think about the role for private individuals and what they're allowed to do when the cops aren't around. For example, if we're sitting on our house and a guy comes in and threatens us with a gun, maybe under some circumstances we're allowed to shoot back. Well, but the rule is actually somewhat restrictive. You can only shoot back if your life is in immediate danger. You can use only enough force to repel the attack. You can't run after the guy with a gun, and so on. What are the rules in cyberspace? In fact, in cyberspace, that rule is clear for the private sector. That is, the private sector cannot shoot back, period. There's an interesting question. as to whether or not that's the right policy position to have. The good guy who's under attack can't fire back in cyberspace in a way that harms the attacker's computers, nor can he even seek intelligence information about the identity of the perpetrator. Having taken you through some of the direct analogies between cyber conflict and cops and criminals, let me caution that there are some scenarios in cyberspace that don't have any ready analogs. For example, one such situation is that nations come to some agreements about how they should behave during war. For example, they agree not to target hospitals or religious institutions, even if they're at war, even though factories producing ammunition or airfields or other military forces are perfectly legitimate targets. In cyberspace, maybe they could agree not to target power grids or financial systems or medical records. It's an open question as to whether such agreements are practical or desirable or even feasible, but it's a question that deserves some thought. Here's another situation that has no good analog in the cops and criminals scenario. When offensive cyber operations are involved, intelligence gathering might be at stake. That is, we might be trying to collect intelligence on somebody else. On the other hand, they may not be able to see that. They may not know that what our intent is, and since what we're doing looks a lot like cyber attack, they may misinterpret it. In this picture, we have a guy, a good guy, with something that looks like a gun, and in fact, it's a taser, which comes in some packages that look like guns. How is the bad guy going to know that we're holding a taser and not a real gun on him? He may misinterpret our intent and take action that would be very dangerous. Another issue is the idea that the conduct of cyber attacks may involve the private sector in a very direct way. So as a matter of policy, we may need the cooperation of private sector internet service providers in order to launch a cyber attack. How we manage this relationship between government and the private sector is an important issue, and in the future, private sector and government may look very much the same. We may have to come very much closer together. Still, another policy issue that comes up is that the U.S. cyber operations may well increase the cybersecurity threat to the private sector. For example, if we launch a cyber attack against somebody else, they may retaliate against us, and they may not go after the government. They may go after us personally. They may go after private industry, for example. So in the cops and criminals world, for example, sometimes criminals respond to law enforcement authorities by threatening members of their families, intimidating jury members, and so on. That is, they don't act against the cops. They act against the people that care about the cops and the people that the cops care about. So in cyberspace, a bad guy may retaliate against our industry or our power grids or something like that if we launch a cyber attack that he doesn't like. The fact that the bad guys may try to retaliate against us in ways that we don't expect or don't like or think are unfair doesn't mean we shouldn't launch a cyber attack. It's only that we have to think through what it means to do so, and that we should be as aware as we possibly can be about the ultimate consequences of our cyber attacks. I hope I persuaded you that this domain of cyber conflict is one that deserves serious thought. Some people say that the good guys shouldn't be arming themselves in cyberspace, and that by everyone being armed in cyberspace, good guys included, we're just promoting a wild, wild west mentality where everyone takes care of number one. But that boat has sailed. It's now a matter of declared national policy that we will have offensive capabilities in cyberspace. And the open questions today relate to the circumstances under which we will use those capabilities and the policy that will govern their use. Our report, shown here, pointed to the need for an open and public dialogue about using offensive capabilities as a matter of national policy. And that means learning about the topic, asking questions, and becoming informed in an area in which there are no clear answers today.